First of all, I'll make a few lines of characterization and then give two arguments. First of all, it will be able to strengthen the international relationship between the countries. Second of all, it will be able to help the country to better resolve the conflicts. So first of all, moving on to fewer lines of characterization. So what is the ASEAN and South Asian nations like? It includes countries like Brunei, Cambodia, Eastern Timor, Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, Singapore, and Thailand, Myanmar, and so on. So what are these countries like? Because these countries are ones that are relatively poor than, for example, maybe some of the Western countries. The ones that still is a lot of oftentimes so on developing countries. There are ones that need to bond together in order to solve problems. There are also ones that's probably having a lot of diversity within the kind of political bonds. So first of all, moving on to the first argument about how it will be able to strengthen the international relationship between the countries. First of all, through cooperating with each other and engaging in others' issues, believe that each country will be able to better understand the problem that the other side is having. And also will be able to form more agreements, for example, treaties with each other. Through this kind of process of helping the other countries to settle in with their disputes and be able to, for example, solve the Pakistan for Philippine problem, sea problem, or for example, solving the Myanmar problem, it means that it will be able to have a much closer relationship with the country that are in the dispute, and also it means that they will be able to form more agreements and more treaties on, for example, how they could better engage on the power benefits between the two countries. That also means that it will be able to let there be more kind of cooperations that's happening between countries that engage in with each other. Second of all, our ASEAN being a cooperation with a large diversity that is existing within, with a lot of religion, with a lot of, course, of different historical backgrounds within the country, believe that it is especially important for all of the other more countries to engage in the problems or the issues of another country. This is because oftentimes these countries are because of this kind of like difference in a culture, it's very important for countries within the political bonds in order to understand each other more. We shouldn't let these countries to be isolated or separated by each other because of their difference culturally or religiously. Therefore, with this cooperation with engagement, country will also be better able to know and understand about how the other country is and different kind of phases and get a kind of different kind of scenarios. So in this case, we will be able to let countries have better understanding with each other and also have better political kind of alignment with each other, in which there will be a more kind of power balance that's be able to be achieved within the member countries. Now we on to the second argument about how it actually will be able to help the country with the conflict more. This is because oftentimes these countries within the ASEAN are ones that will be able to have the ability to solve the problem simply by themselves. Let's have, for example, Philippines as an example. Philippines is one that is indeed having like a not very good political, for example, situation. They already have went through, for example, dictatorship and so on. But in this case, it's very important for other member countries in order to assist the country with whether money in order to help their citizens or assist the country into imposing there with new thoughts about how they will better develop country like China to assist the countries more in order to let them be able to like develop better and be able to have better thoughts and better better political system that's built within the countries. So therefore, we believe that the small countries that's within the ASEAN will need those big countries like China's help in order to support themselves and be able to have more innovation and more improvement in their country. And also, let's say for example, Vietnam example, in which there is indeed for some multiple wars that have happened, and there is for example an impact of like imperialism before, and there are division in the people like of division between people in the country, but that is also very important for maybe like other country to engage in and help the country to restructure how people think about each other within the country and be able to help them solve the for example imperialism problem better. So why it is actually so important for not only the government and in the country itself to engage in these kind of like religious and these kind of political problems, but it's also important for the other countries to engage in. This is because There might be, for example, inability in the government itself of solving those kind of issues, and therefore it will probably need the other countries' assistance in order to do so. Yeah, what's a POI?
There are 193 UN recognized nations. Only 10 of them are ASEAN. Why is it imperatively important that you put only the ASEAN countries? For example, in Myanmar, you need the assistance of Bangladesh.
So wait, I don't understand what you mean. But however, I believe that because this debate is about SEAN, so therefore we believe that it's about how SEAN, the country within the SEAN, should be able to help each other to be able to build closer bonds instead of just having each of the countries sound like individually but divided, with a difference in religion, difference in culture, and feeling that they're actually detached from each other because of them not interfering with each other's problem, not really solving those issues together, and having those kind of bigger political bonds is so important for those countries because a lot of countries in these SEAN are indeed developing countries, and they need to bond together to, for example, or go against, for example, the Western imperialism, go against those kind of tension that's with like other countries around the world, and they also need to bond together in order to make bigger innovation, and also like more quickly develop themselves. So what I might interfere and say is that these interference with other state might lead to more disputes. Why this is actually not going to happen? Because the conflicts between those countries have already exist within the country might already exist in the first place. So in order to solve a problem, isn't just to let the country themselves to deal with the problem. Instead, we believe it's to let there to be more agreements and more aid from all the countries in the cooperation in order to solve the problem quicker. Second of all, we believe that if there is a larger force put into solving a single issue, it's of course better than having one force put into solving the issue themselves. So we believe that we will be able to feel like there is assistance from each other in the SCAN, building more bonds, more relationship, and therefore letting them to be more likely to be detached from each other and let the SEN be able to, as a whole, cooperate and move forward. Therefore, we are so proud to propose this.
Judge, here today I stand before you as leader of opposition to prove to you why ASEAN is such a valuable alliance towards these Southeast Asian countries that are developing. In my speech, I will mainly go over two things: why ASEAN is beneficial for the economy, and the benefits that ASEAN provides when it comes to things such as conflicts. First of all, let me go into a bit more about the economic benefits of ASEAN. First, as it has been clearly stated, ASEAN is an economic and political union, and opposition recognizes that. And we say that ASEAN, by abolishing the way of ASEAN, you're actually losing out on a lot of economic benefits. And here's why. So first of all, ASEAN as a group, as an economic and political group, they bring a lot to the table. Say if you were to take one of these individual developing countries, say for Myanmar, and they were to say trade with some they were to attempt trade with a country such as China or USA, these like very big developed countries, they probably wouldn't be able to trade because they don't offer much of anything. However, as if they were to trade as ASEAN as like a group, the offer would be more appealing due to the fact there are more states willing to contribute, and because of that, it also brings a lot of economic benefit. Also, by not interfering with each other and keeping the ASEAN way, they can actually allocate more resources to other things other than trade as well. Because think about it, if you're abolishing the ASEAN way, then that means you're saying we're allowing states to interfere with each other, which means they can interfere with things such as trade, and by interfering and countries may spend too much resources on interfering with each other's trade, and by that way they aren't like allocating resources properly to help these developing countries help themselves grow, since we clearly agree upon the fact that most countries in ASEAN are developing countries. Whoever send a POI in chat, please speak.
why would local ASEAN nations interfere with each other's trades? They're literally allies.
Okay, so as we the motion is we're trying to abolish the ASEAN way, right? So by abolishing the ASEAN way, we're saying we can interfere with each other now. What says they won't interfere with each other's trade? So by keeping this, it actually also maintains stability. And moving on to my next point of neutrality. So why is this so important? Once again, these countries are developing nations. They don't have the ability to really mediate their own. Sorry, the neutrality here is so good because by maintaining neutrality, it allows them to trade with both sides of a conflict. Say China got into conflict with, I don't know, Korea, just in like a hypothetical situation. ASEAN would be able to conduct trade with both sides without actually like ruining their political relationships with both, because they stand as neutral. They are not like leaning towards any specific side. And by doing, and also another reason why the neutrality is so good is because ASEAN can be used as a mediator for conflicts. So we know that in Southeast Asia there are a lot of like indigenous groups. There's a lot of like minorities, and sometimes these minorities may not agree with each other. And this is exactly why being neutral is so good, is because they can mediate their own country's conflicts inside of them without requiring external assistance or through other methods. And why is this so important? Why is keeping ASEAN, like the ASEAN way, so important? It's important because one, it maintains a lot of these long-standing trade relationships that by now have become vital for the country to survive due to the fact that they are trading with such big countries, and it's most likely that a lot of their economies are now like very dependent on these trade. Also, why is the neutrality important? Because once again, you can mediate conflicts, but you can also maintain like political relationships. You can trade with other countries that are in like a war, and because of that, I'm so proud to oppose. Thank you.
So I think OO has a misunderstanding of the ASEAN way, right? We see in the info slide quite clearly that the ASEAN way is just a diplomatic strategy where states have complete sovereignty and complete sovereignty over diplomatic and economic policies, right? Where countries, because they have complete sovereignty, each state has complete sovereignty to decide what happens within their own country. Countries therefore refuse to sit down and talk about their differences and needs and wants and make agreements, because agreements is basically inhibited because every state decides their own policies, right? What we want to point out in the status quo is that these conflicts, considering social, political, economic, and technological differences and conflicts, already exist in the status quo between countries. And in the status quo, they remain unresolved because of the ASEAN way, because it is seen as part of, because all these social, political, economic, and technological policies are seen as part of total sovereignty, not open to agreement. We think opening up these affairs to agreement opportunities, this opens up opportunities to actually reach mutually beneficial contracts that OO wants to talk about. So now I'll give some deep analysis of how these mutual beneficial contracts actually work. For example, we're talking about economic agreements, about lowering tariffs and lowering restrictions on trade. For example, each country separately, in the status quo, does not have an incentive to lower tariffs because they want to ensure that their own people is employed. No, thank you. But international trade is mutually beneficial. Even when one country produces more than the other products, international trade is still beneficial because it is comparative advantage that matters, not the absolute advantage. It's economic 101, right? We give an example of country A. For example, Country A in an hour can produce either 6 potatoes
Let's
or
engage.
2 cartons of milk. No, thank you. Country B could produce one potato and 1 milk. And country A, we see country A has an absolute advantage on producing both products, but it's mutually beneficial for A and B to trade 2 potatoes for 1 milk, because for A, 3 potatoes basically equals 1 milk. And for B, 1 potato equals 1 milk that they could produce. So therefore, trading 2 potatoes for one milk is going to be mutually beneficial. Second, on how economic
Why?
on how lowering tariffs is mutually beneficial. Tariffs, like all taxes, inhibit economic trade, and that is economic trade, which is mutually beneficial for the buyer and the producer, right? For example, I am a computer programmer and I want someone to mow my lawn. And if I own my lawn myself in 1 hour, in 1 hour, if I do not mow my lawn, I could make like $100 doing computer programming. And the other guy, this janitor B, if he mows a lawn, he could also mow my lawn in 1 hour. And as a janitor, if he does not mow my lawn in this hour, he could make $30. So if I employ this janitor to help mow my lawn, it will be mutually beneficial for me to give him any price between 100 to 30, hypothetically. So any money I pay, any money within this range is going to be mutually beneficial for both of us. This is the concept of like opportunity cost. But if the tax, suppose that how does tax inhibit this mutually beneficial trade? If the tax is $71, this mutually beneficial trade will not happen. So a lot of people think that taxes are bad because they took away money from people's trade. That is not true. Taxes hurt trade because it causes these mutually beneficial trade that could have happened does not occur. That is the opportunity cost caused by taxes. Now I take a POI from like CO if I offer one. CO.
The info site clearly states that this talks about internal issues, not about economic trade in general. This motion is about international relations, not economics.
I'm not sure how international relation is unrelated to economics, right? Because in the modern day world, all these international agreements, you'll see like I'm not sure 80% of them is about economics, is about capital flow, it's about employment, it's about tied to every part of the country's activities, right? Everyone have to engage in economic activities every day, and I think the info slide already stated that in the ASEAN Way basically stated that all the countries in and of itself have complete sovereignty. And I think complete sovereignty means complete control of their own tariffs, complete control of their borders, and complete economic control. And therefore, because the ASEAN Way limits the opportunity and the scope for countries to sit down and make economic agreements, I think this significantly limits economic trade because they have complete sovereignty over terrorists. Then therefore terrorists is not something that two countries could basically make agreements and talk about, right? If they have complete sovereignty over their borders and over their areas, then the free trade areas are basically not going to exist as much on our side of the house, where all of these rights are open to discussion as long as they reach a mutually beneficial outcome. And third of all, I'll just talk about how other even if we leave out even Judge, you don't buy that economic agreement, we're going to talk about other agreements that are also mutually beneficial in different areas, such as in sharing technology, making agreements about sharing technology, especially agricultural technology, sharing new strands of wheat, rice that could grow within the South Asian countries. We think that this agricultural technology is very unique to the South Asian Union because countries in the South Asian part are in the same geographical region. They have the same climate, the same soil, and the same temperature, and the amount of rainfall. Therefore, the food that grows well in one area is also likely to be suited for another country as well. In the status quo, these countries do not have an incentive to freely give technology without any agreement because they don't get any benefit in exchange. When South Asian countries have a platform to make agreements, the sharing of this technology and agricultural technology especially will increase because other countries could offer the country with technology something in return. This greatly increases the chances of technology flow, increases the country's production capacity because they get better technology, especially in agriculture, increasing the amount of food. It's really important where lots of these South Asian countries are less developed countries where millions of their citizens are starving, right? So I think all agrees with the power of agreements, but they got the Asian way wrong. Asian way is about inhibiting countries that that make agreements. On our side, we actually promote more agreements being made and solve conflict between these countries. So proud to propose.
Opening government, right, is a very standard example of that one team that reads the info slide, right, reads the motion, and then completely puts it behind their back to make arguments that are completely unrelated to what we are talking about today in this debate. Now, allow me to read the info slide, the important parts in the slide. The ASEAN Way follows a principle of non-interference among its member states, which means that member countries cannot interfere with the internal issues of other member states. Some manifestations of the ASEAN Way include member states interfering with the current dispute in the West Philippine Sea, i.e., the dispute between China and the Philippines, and not interfering during the 2021 Myanmar coup d'etat. And nowhere does the info slide talk about anything related to economics, and nowhere does it talk about anything related to trade. It talks about conflicts and disputes. What does this mean? Fighting, pew, punches, right? These are the things that it talks about. Right. Now, with this covered, right, we believe the opening government's case totally just does not stand, as they've been talking about economics with their two speeches. Now, moving on to some points on our side, right? Even though the opening government, their entire speech is just completely wrong, right? They still make some valid points that still can apply to international relations, in internal disputes. Now, what are they? First, they talk about more cooperation, right? And how ASEAN is large and diverse. There's multicultural and religious backgrounds, and we need to interfere in order to build strong connections. It is exactly because that ASEAN is very diverse, that they have different ideological, religious, and cultural backgrounds, that we should not be interfering. Right? As an Asian country, we should not be interfering because it risks it risks harming other countries. It risks you going in using your ideology to help another country which has completely different ideology. The reason why NATO, the reason why NATO, is able to help each other is because they have the same ideology. They all believe in open market capitalism, and they all believe in the idea of democracy or a republic, right? But ASEAN, right, you have dictatorships, you have democracy, you have half democracy, you have failed democracy, you have authoritarian regimes, right? You have autocracy, you have all of these systems, right, which do not bow together, which do not fit well, right? You have Muslims, you have Christians, right? You have Hindus, right? You have all these religions that also do not fit well together. When we talk about intervening, right, trade in itself does not care about what your religion or culture, only cares about the goods that you produce, right? Whereas if you're going in with guns blazing, right, it directly means that you might be interfering, you might be clashing with other countries' ideology. Next, there's part about trade, right? Yes, it is. Trade is important. It's an important factor in this debate, right? But not in the way that the opponents have characterized it. How is trade important? First, when you look at the general scope of ASEAN right now, right, or general scope of the world, what we see in Asia is a few major conflicts. First, we have China and South China Sea. We have China and a specific island off the coast of China, right? We have the issue of the Myanmar coup d'etat, which is killing people, right? Of course, and then we have issues between some animosity in Malaysia and Singapore with Malaysia wanting to take control and that stuff, right? So therefore, we do not believe that now in the general scope it is very China or USA, right? When we look at issues such as the Philippine Sea, you either support China or you go against China, right? Support US or go against US, right? China and specific island, right? You go against China or support China. And why is China important? Because China is the biggest country in the Asian Pacific region, right? All countries want to trade with China to improve their own economies. Therefore, as an Asian country, you interfering with other countries risks you directly clashing your interests with that of China or the United States, two big countries that you do not want to have clashing interests with, right? As an ASEAN is called the Switzerland of Asia for a reason, because it tries to maintain neutrality as much as possible. This directly means not interfering with conflicts in its region, right, with its member states. This means that they would rather turn a blind eye and keep their neutralistic stance than take a stance and risk losing trade opportunities, or risk angering people, or risk losing their name as the Switzerland of Asia. Well, why is this label of Switzerland of Asia important? As my teammate stated, it is important because it helps mediate further conflicts within the Asia region, or disputes, or whatever that sort, that does not include, or is not include or directly affect like member states, right? It allows them to take a semi-neutralistic stance in issues against issues of Japan pouring nuclear waste into the ocean. It allows them to take a neutralistic stance in the issues of China and the island off of China, right? It allows them to do these things, and it gives them the quote unquote moral high ground in these issues. I'll take a POI from closing. Yeah.
Most things that require aid are not conflicts. Things like humanitarian aid or things like economic crises.
Okay, sure. Humanitarian aid, economic crises. First of all, again, info slide. I do not think. Actually, no. Yeah, the info slide. The examples that I give are both centered around disputes, right, between let's say political or land disputes, right? These things are very side-based. Secondly, with the issue of aid, right, you still have to take a stance, right? If you help a country in a because most conflicts are one-sided or two-sided, right? If you take one side, you're naturally going against the other side, right? This still puts them at a stance in which it shows that they are supporting one side or supporting something that they might not want to that will ruin their image of a neutralistic organization. Following it up, we strongly oppose. Thank you.
The opening half of this debate has fixated on the economic aspects of ASEAN. But what about the humanitarian aspects? What about the millions of people who lost their access to democracy that day when the coup happened in Myanmar? That is what we as closing government want to focus on, the lives lost due to humanitarian crises within these regions, and because countries do not have the balls to interfere within other countries. Now, what will I do in my speech? Firstly, a little bit of recharacterization of like what ASEAN looks like, what the ASEAN way looks like, and specifically in which context interference would occur. But also moving on to a little bit of rebuttal against opening opposition, and then finally on our unique extensions on firstly deterrence, secondly on the principled obligation to help out other countries within ASEAN, but also finally on the reputation on the international stage. So firstly, a little bit of recharacterization, right? What does ASEAN look like? ASEAN is a union of these Southeast Asian states, right? So we characterize that these countries often need money and aid, right? We say that these countries are unstable, like Myanmar, for example, right? The Philippines with its disputes with China, right? We see that these countries need and like necessitate some form of interference in order to like survive. But we also said that the ASEAN way completely neglects that because it advocates for non-interference, meaning not interfering with the country's economic crises and specifically its humanitarian crises as well. What do we propose instead? Because we see that we feel like there's a counterfactual was missing with the opening half of this debate. Our counterfactual is that we provide aid when a country either requests it or is determined to need national aid in like a very desperate scenario, right? What does this aid look like? It looks like giving financial aid. It looks like we're not invading a country, unlike the characterization given by opening opposition. At most, it looks like giving military weapons in like the most dire of scenarios, right? Most reasons for aid don't necessitate invasions. Now, moving on to opening opposition, then a little bit of a rebuttal. Firstly, on their point about over dependence, right? I feel like interference does not result in independence because in over dependence, because interference is limited to when a country needs it as per our counterfactual. But let's say even if they become over dependent, sure, we're willing to bite the bullet, because if it allows these countries to not fall into disorder and anarchy, we are willing to take over dependence over the fall of our country. But also their DLO brings up a point about how ASEAN is diverse and that interference increases hostility. We say that I don't think ASEAN is so diverse that the Philippines would refuse aid from Indonesia in like their dispute against China, for example, just because of religious differences. I feel like countries would prioritize the survival of their country and view it as something that is like done in goodwill, like, and prioritize that over like their religious differences, right? But also they talk about how invading other people. No, thank you. Firstly, referring to our characterization again about how most times it doesn't necessitate invading others, but also secondly, even under their characterization, we still win because we have the principled obligation to help other countries by interfering within them to keep them afloat. I feel like that is better than like even in their characterization. Now, moving on to our extensions. Firstly, on the extension on deterrence, right? We say a few layers to this. Firstly, there's better relations with other countries. Why? Because they're helping with internal issues. So other countries feel indebted to them and therefore they're on good terms with other ASEAN countries. What does this mean? That means firstly, countries are less likely to attack each other in any form, like financially or even militarily, right? Because they know that they get the same protection from ASEAN, right? But also secondly, cooperation, this means that there's more cooperation in terms of like scientific innovation, for example, because the relationship with other countries is just better. But also, second layer, people are less likely to do things like overthrow their own government or like engage in corruption, right? Because they know that they are facing a much bigger foe that actually like interferes within other countries when they're doing something stupid, right? We like, for example, Russia hasn't invaded the Baltics because NATO, they know that if they invade the Baltics, NATO will come crashing down towards Moscow, right? In the event in which deterrence fails, we say that they're still able to better respond to issues precisely because they're able to interfere within certain places. Again, referring back to that NATO example, they're able to effectively coordinate like in the response to the Ukraine war because like they as a bloc, like, you know, thank you, have a collective interest in like defending Ukraine. But also we say that therefore this is mutually beneficial for all people involved. Judge, why should you weigh this over opening government? Because we should weigh financial issues over like the economic issues that they state, right? They say that like their case mainly focuses on economies, but what about the lives lost and what about the people who lost their access to democracy in Myanmar? This is why you should prioritize our argument extension over deterrence over OG's case. But now moving on to the principled obligation about how ASEAN members have a principled obligation to like help other states, right? For example, firstly, they have the social contract to like basically help other states, right? As a union of states, the states receive benefits from ASEAN, such as like political and economic cooperation, and so therefore they are obligated in turn to help out other member nations to maintain the union, but also as a form of reparation to the union itself. But also, secondly, we say that it's principally unjustified to not interfere within a country and better the state of a country objectively when you have the power to do so. If the state has the power to prevent a coup or a genocide, they are obligated to stop it because stopping it is a net benefit to the entire union and the world as a whole. But also, judge the scale of atrocities that are happening within ASEAN member nations, like the Rohingya genocide or the Myanmar civil war, or even the disputes with the Philippines and China. They're atrocious, right? We say that therefore there's another principal obligation that they need to be stopped, especially when these countries have the power to do so. It just comes with not following the ASEAN way and just sticking with non-interference, because that is not how you help to solve these atrocities, right? But also, what is the point of ASEAN? A union of states, right? It's supposed to protect its states both economically and politically. With the policy of non-interference, that goes all out the window, because the thing is that they're literally not allowed to help other countries and interfere within other countries when they really and desperately need it. And so therefore, there's a principal obligation in all these aspects for these states to help other states and go disregard the ASEAN way. And so, Judge, what did I bring to you uniquely in this debate? We way over OG because we provide things with like the most vulnerable, we provide arguments targeting the most vulnerable people in this debate. That is the vulnerable people who suffer because of humanitarian crises. We way over OO because we rebutted their point on dependence, but also we rebutted their very uncharitable characterization that this aid and interference just looks like invading other countries. And because of all these reasons, Judge, please vote for CG. Thank you.
Judge, I think the open half clearly misunderstands the focus of the debate. The topic is not economics, it's international relations. We believe that the government values economics more than the international relations, and it's not touched upon. I'll provide you today analysis, rebuttals, and some extensions. First on analysis, the main stakeholder debate is ASEAN. What is the best interest of ASEAN? What it is to be sustainable in the long term. This means that not only are the political aspects inherently what the ASEAN proposes, it is the economic aspects as well. They want to have in long term. What is the key fundamentals of the ASEAN Way? First, it's the non-interference of international affairs of one another. And overall, it's to have an effective cooperation among themselves. What does this mean? At the end of the day, the main goal of ASEAN is to have the best interest to make it longer for both sides. Now moving on to some rebuttals. First, moving on to the government's case on strengthening international relations. First, they talk about they can form more agreements. There's no mechanism, but I'll still respond. First, eliminating the ASEAN Way could lead to more increased division among member states. What this is like, instead of working towards a common goal, countries might prioritize their national interests, resulting in negotiations and lack of a unified strategy. This fragmentation can make it challenging to reach agreements, as different priorities and objectives can prevent the formation of appropriate collective position, which is not recognized by nor the closing or the opening government. And they talk about how the closer the relationship is, the better. However, notice that sometimes closer relationships can sometimes lead to dependency, where one party becomes overly reliant on each other, and this creates vulnerabilities in the long term. And even if you don't take this, closer relationships don't necessarily eliminate conflicting interests. Even closely aligned countries or organizations might have different priorities or goals that often lead to friction and disagreements. Here, the closing government comes up and says, oh, there's going to be no corruption because people are going to be more aware. However, note that corruption is evident on both sides, and the extent and the impact of corruption can vary widely across the different contexts, and some countries or organizations manage to operate with a low level of corruption due to strong institution culture norms or effective enforcement mechanisms, which varies on other side. Also, they talk about how they can engage and tackle this way. However, ASEAN has already worked well. Why do we need to change this? They do not provide any reasons to this. Additionally, we tell you that this can lead to political dissonance, as if the approach breaks down, it could lead to divisions within ASEAN, with member states pursuing their own interests rather than working together. This unity can weaken the organization's collective bargaining power and diminish its influence on the global stage. Second, tackling, no thank you. They tell you that it can better help country to better resolve conflict by having economic issues. However, the first speaker comes to the podium talk about milks and potatoes. However, this trust is essential for smooth relations, and countries need to believe that trade partners will honor agreements and not act unutilitarian to the determined. Without the ASEAN Way, the trust could erode, leading to a reluctance in engagement in long-term trade agreements and cooperative economic initiatives. Why is this true? The continuous different nature of ASEAN Way ensures that trade policies are developed with the interests of all member states in mind. If this approach is abandoned, countries might prioritize their own national interests over regional cooperation, leading to the imposition of trade barriers such as tariffs, quotas, or protectionist policies, which overall harms the ASEAN Way itself. Here they talk about sharing technology too, but why would they share it in the first place? Just because ASEAN Way is banned doesn't mean that they have an incentive to open up to everything. And without ASEAN Way, countries would have inherent national interests and priorities they will not be willing to compromise, so that point goes away. And before moving on to our case, I'll take the POI.
On,
okay, no engagement.
On your side, aren't countries more encouraged to follow their own path because they're not able to interfere within other countries to help them?
That's what I literally just said. Countries are literally driven to their own ways because they do not have any relations to others. And I literally told you that trade policies, for example, these countries will create barriers and disrupt tariffs and quotas and make protectionist policies and overall reduce the overall benefits of the trade within the region and make it more self-idealistic to the countries themselves. Now moving on to our case. First, we told that abandoning the Asian Way will create political tensions. We told you that ASEAN Way had ASEAN members practice in this principle since the founding of organizations. Doing this black and white stuff will way distort the nature of that has been kept. By getting involved in the conflict, for example, Thailand might be pressured to take sides between China and the USA, both of which significant regions in the significant interests in the region. This could strain Thailand's relationship with either or both superpowers, as they might see Thailand's involvement as favoring one side or another. This is particularly challenging because both China and USA are important trade partners, allies for Thailand. And second, such involvement could destabilize border Southeast Asian regions, other ASEAN countries might feel pressure to take sides, potentially leading to divisions within ASEAN itself. This could undermine the unity and collective strength of ASEAN as an organization. What's the impact? The impact is that these tensions can have long-lasting effects. For example, if Thailand actions are perceived as siding with one superpower, it can overall damage friendships with other countries in the region that has opposing views. Second, we tell you that it provides weaker nations in the Asian to strengthen their sovereignty and power over the nation. What does it look like? 2 points. First, it establishes some level of autonomy in the nation, insofar as the stronger nations in the ASEAN will not overrule weaker nations. B, we tell you that principally wrong for economy and politically stronger nations to pose more influence in their respective nation in their own internal conflicts. What does this look like? The ASEAN Way gives an equal voice to smaller countries, given the diversity within the ASEAN, size of power, and have an equal say in decision making. This prevents larger or more influential countries from dominating the agenda, which could otherwise lead to divisiveness and weaken the cohesion of organizations. For instance, instead of Brunei making satellite in Malaysia, they can go in and engage with things that they don't. Why do we win 0-0 over this? We take the most vulnerable stakeholders in power and give them the long-term benefit. Sure, we may lose on urgency, but we help them more sustainable nations in the long term. Why do we win over OG in this case? Why is our extent better than proven by CO compared to 0-0? What 0-0 tells you in their point is that this makes the countries better and better themselves, and they're able to remain neutrality on the level of country. We tell you that, yes, this is true and very important. As CEO, we prove to you that we tell you that it is in the best interest of ASEAN. We prove you that this is the most important trait that ASEAN wants to keep, is long-term sustainability and creating strong union in the EU, what is essentially in the interest of ASEAN long-term. Thus, we've been on long-term sustainability principle level, best interest of stakeholders. That's why we are strongly likely to oppose. Thank you.
One of CO's 2 rebuttals to our case is saying that ASEAN has been working relatively good. Is it really working well when things like coups are happening within Myanmar, when there's conflicts happening within the West Philippine Sea, when things like Rohingya genocides are happening consistently without aid from other nations? I don't really think so. I think the thing about this debate is that these countries really need the aid. It's not whether an optional thing, whether that they should get it or not. It's on the idea that they oftentimes need it in order to survive, to sustain themselves. Myanmar's coup would never, it obviously was very easy for the Myanmar military to actually conduct the coup. And without support from other nations, there would never be enough deterrence or enough support to actually resolve issues. In this speech, I want to focus on how the houses separately. Firstly on OG, secondly on CO, and then thirdly on OO. Firstly on weighing against OG and why we beat them. Their main point within their argument is that, first of all, they can help with conflicts, and second of all, they can develop better relationships. First of all, our point on deterrence outweighs most of their arguments for a few reasons. First of all, if we deter the conflict, this conflict doesn't happen in the first place. Therefore, the harms of the conflict happening will never occur. OG is able to solve the conflict, but we prove that the conflict will be prevented in the first place with this deterrence. Second of all, our case is a prerequisite to their case. We characterize what this conflict actually looks like. They talk about things like economic trade, but we're able to characterize things like ethnic cleansings, like humanitarian crises or economic crises can also happen consistently within these nations that also need aid. So we actually were able to characterize a broader scope of this debate that they fail to recognize. Second point then on their idea of relationships. Their relationship argument mostly focused on things like economic trade and things like these that is just generally insignificant compared to actually preventing huge crises, like our argument on deterrence do. Second of all, we prove why relationships actually improve and why these benefits occur. We're able to characterize things like researches are able to happen when we actually have better relationships. Third of all, we're able to characterize what ASEAN actually looks like, what these nations actually look like, how they're unstable in nature and they need support, a lot of the things that they have failed to address. Fourth of all, we're able to bring up principal unique obligation for you to actually be able to help these other nations, and because you have a unique obligation and a social contract within these other nations that acts above practical. For these reasons above, we win against OG. Second point then on CO. The only unique point we actually get from CO is on the idea of prioritizing national interest. They do mention things like having to choose between 2 countries when a conflict happens, but that's generally very similar to OO, so I'll respond to that later. Their case on prioritizing national interest then. First of all, it's very unclear why countries will be prioritizing their own national interests. On our side, you're literally going to be interfering with your own member nations to help them. On their side, it's more likely you're going to be prioritizing national interests because there's no interference policy, because you only need to focus on yourself. On our side, when you need to focus on everyone, it's a lot more likely you're able to not prioritize your national interests and help them. We're able to flip this point. Second of all, we explained to you that this doesn't necessarily matter because of the idea of deterrence. If deterrence were to be able to be successful, there's no reason for these national interests to actually happen in the first place because no conflicts will be occurring at the end of the day, right? Even if conflicts do occur and our deterrence point doesn't work at all, all, without interference, without this interference that these countries really need, we think that things like prioritizing national interest is okay in this scenario because you're still going to be sending resources because in the interference policies still obviously exist, right? This wipes out the majority of CO case. Now, CO responds to our case in a few ways. The first thing they tell you is that the first thing that OO mentions is on the idea of OO and CO both mentioned this point, which on the idea of over-dependence. First of all, there's still incentives to maintain dependence, right? For example, other ASEAN nations are likely to push you to become a more dependent nation because, first of all, ASEAN, you never know how long it's going to last, right? There's still going to be risks in terms of ASEAN facing a crisis and things happening to your country leaving the ASEAN, or many conflicts can occur. So you obviously want to maintain your own independent military or your independent power to ensure that you're not dependent on other nations. Second of all, if you're dependent on other nations, you can be very easily controlled. They can force you to do certain things if you want to maintain the resources that you are gaining from the other countries. Therefore, you as an ASEAN nation are unlikely to risk for this to happen because it can be extremely detrimental. Therefore, you're likely to not be over-dependent. Third of all, we think over-dependence, even on the worst case scenario in which it somehow occurs, is completely fine, simply because you're still going to be gaining resources because you're a huge association. In many situations, such as like the coup of Myanmar, you need these resources. Even if you're over-dependent, we're willing to trade off this over-dependence for saving your entire nation from falling under the hands of an economic crisis or a coup from happening. Okay, then, second point that OO and CO both mentioned is on the idea of like having to pick between two sides. Like what if, like, for example, you have to pick between the China or the US within these scenarios? The first thing I would like to point out is the majority of the cases isn't necessarily an international conflict, right? The coup of Myanmar isn't an international conflict, it's an internal conflict. Things like internal conflicts happen a lot more, and things like, for example, humanitarian aid or crises or like economic crises are things that happen a lot more frequently within these nations. It's not like you go to war every single day. It's more likely there's a lot of issues you need to resolve internally compared to these external points they focus on. We fixate on the majority of the debate while they fixate on this small point, which is on the idea of like conflicts happening, and they rely on this assumption that it will happen. Second of all, it's very unlikely that every single ASEAN nation will have a conflict. When a conflict happens, they're going to have to pick sides, right? Some ASEAN nations might have different alliances with others. So under these scenarios, they can help a nation without having to pick between two sides. Even if one ASEAN nation is unable to do this, other ASEAN nations can obviously step in and help resolve this conflict. It's very unclear why every single ASEAN nation will suddenly have a situation in which they have to pick between two sides. And when that situation happens, we think it's very, very unlikely for that to occur in the first place. Last of all, their only real impact to this is on the idea of economic trade and how you can't trade with both sides. We think that the economic trade is relatively insignificant on this point because, first of all, we're able to flip this point by saying that international trade will be better because you have better relationships when you're able to develop this relationship and like have interference policies. But second of all, economic trade is relatively insignificant compared to the impacts we're able to bring to you, like humanitarian crises being solved or economic crises being solved. These issues are generally a lot bigger than other issues. Before this, I'll take a POI if there are any.
Vietnam trades exponentially more with China as compared to Brunei. Tell us why that this is more prevalent for Asian nations, because technically they do trade with other nations more.
Okay, so the thing about this is, as characterized earlier, not every single ASEAN nation is going to have like this conflict to pick upon. Second of all, we think that even if they were to have to pick upon like a side, we think that's okay because you still gain the support from the other 10 nations that are within ASEAN in the first place to actually make sure that this like picking is not going to be too big of a deal, right? And oftentimes we think that because of this, it's not going to be a very big issue. Your only impact to this entire case is on the idea of an economic trade not happening. That's just very insignificant compared to the impacts we're able to give you. Okay, so at the end of the day, even on their best case scenario, we're still able to outweigh CO and CO and OO relatively easily. On our case, first of all, the principle, which has gone unresponded, which is on the idea that you just have a principal obligation. Notice that this operates above the practical, meaning that if they try to rebut and weigh this practically, they're unable to do so, and they need to strike out the principle independently. Second of all, we proved to you that deterrence is the most important factors, right? Sure, we might lose economic trade, even on their best case scenario, but on our side, we're able to prevent conflicts that generally kill people and lose lives in our side with the deterrence in the first place. For the reasons above, proud to propose.
For the moment that opening bench comes up to the debate and talks about potatoes and milks and how this economic trade will essentially benefit these countries, and from the moment they talk about like how these like Asian nations have similar climates, this is exactly why opening bench, or specifically the government side, has lost the debate. Let's tell you why do we win over three sides. But before we do so, let's do some characterization on what is the most benefit of, like, what is in the most interest of ASEAN, because we tell you that the motion states that this House believes that it is in the best interest of ASEAN to abandon the ASEAN way. Note that no sides prior to Seoul has characterized what this benefit of ASEAN is and what is the best interest of ASEAN. We tell you that the main goal that ASEAN is trying to prove to you today is that they want to have a sustainable They want to have a sustainable union insofar as they want to become like the European Union. They want to have a tradition because ASEAN is relatively new. We tell you that this does not have as long a tradition as the UN or EU. We tell that this is relatively new. What they look for is they want to become more sustainable and self-sustaining and also become I guess a union of unity at the end of the day. We tell you that this was what is in the best interest of ASEAN at the end of the day. They want to become long and sustaining, and therefore, because the three sides weren't able to characterize in the previous debate, we tell you that we give you the characterization, and therefore we're going to put this into this debate. Before that, going on, why do we win over OG, like in the stance of this characterization or what is in the best interest of ASEAN, right? Firstly, they come up and talk about like how this strengthens international relations. They tell you that it's going to cooperate with Asia and they prioritize their proposals. Let me tell you why this happens better on CO. We strengthen international relations in terms of creating friendships and creating projects as a union, right? I think what is in the best interest of ASEAN, like I've already said, is to create progress as a union and not on like the individual level where all would focus on their own nation, right? We tell you that at the end of the day, they're all going through something, right? So we tell you at the end of the day, I think at the end of the day, this still happens on our side because they want to do things as a union, but also respect themselves on an individual level. But secondly, we tell you we also went on progress because we tell you, look, if we keep on looking at each dispute that happens in each nation and this whole like collectively they want to I guess this one nation is trying to pecker another nation and help them, I think at the end of the day we tell you that there's no progress in the union because essentially there's so many conflicts going on in the Southeast Asia region and we tell you that this is never going to make any progress. But thirdly, we tell you that this is actually principally wrong in OG because this is dangerous. We tell you that there's a huge gap between ASEAN nations economically but also in terms of military power. We tell you let's say like Thailand and Singapore have the most military strength out of all ASEAN nations and they're also the most economically affluent, right? We tell you that nations that have less support, we create like satellite states at the end, right? They tell you that satellite states are not going to happen on with CG with their response. We tell you that this still exists. I'm going to prove this later on, but we tell you that this creates satellite nations, which at the end of the day, they're the most vulnerable, I guess, and therefore we win like the clash on vulnerability, right? So therefore, CO wins over like OG on this contention. But secondly, they talk about how this is going to help the country to resolve this conflict. What we tell you is that OG has never proved their exclusivity nor their propensity to analyze this. We say that this is not true. How is this exclusive to the side? They tell us that this makes this essentially resolves the conflict because ASEAN essentially ASEAN is able to help them, right? What CG tells us then is they're going to prevent these genocides from the first place. I think this is a huge mismatch between the two government teams because OG comes up and talks about, oh, we're going to help them after the conflict happens, humanitarian aid. And they said, oh, if we give humanitarian aid, then these would never happen again from the first place. I think there's a big logical mismatch that comes from the two sides. But yes, even if we ignore this and become charitable to the government bench, we tell you that it might be a little better because yes, they're located in the geographical area and therefore sure, they might get faster help on the note of urgency and on the metric of urgency. Even if they take on the metric of urgency, we tell you that at the end of the day, it's still more weighing on our side because we tell you that we avoid the harms of international tensions and proxy states at the end of the day. We tell you that ASEAN is only 10 nations in the world. There's over 193 UN recognized nations. We tell you at the end of the day, nations such as India, Nepal, Bhutan, Korea, US, Australia, all become very important to the nations of ASEAN, for the reason that they're probably spanning over a big region and therefore they do get assistance from these nations as well. We tell you that resolving this conflict is also symmetric on both sides because we tell you that when the Rohingya crisis happened in Myanmar, we saw people leaving to Bangladesh. Bangladesh is not a part of ASEAN. We saw that when people were suffering in Philippines, they were moving to Korea and Japan for more opportunities economically as well. We tell you that this happens regardless of whether ASEAN is there. We tell you that people have other options to go to. We tell you that this it resolves the conflict in the way. Economically, I don't like the previous teams have said, I don't know how this essentially relates with the motion at all. What does OO tell you and why do we win over OO? OO tells you about the economic benefits. And we generally agree with what OO claims as what the economic benefits look like in terms of ASEAN, right? What we tell you is that what they tell you is that ASEAN is beneficial for the economy because it's there's tax reductions and trade is international. But I think the scope of this debate is generally political issues and internal issues and conflicts in terms of humanitarian conflicts, right? Human rights conflicts. So what we tell you is that I'll take that later. What we tell you is that CO is actually able to focus better on what the scope of this debate is, right? We tell you that the scope of this debate is more on the internal conflicts that is defined by the info side rather than the economy, right? We think that this is true, but we think that CO actually gets a focus point of this motion. I think this becomes a direct clash with OG in the sense that yes, this is true, but we tell you that this is not the focus of the debate. Secondly, they talk about how benefits ASEAN provides that when it comes to such conflicts. I think that this essentially is not really what opposition should be arguing for because of the fact that it should be benefits that other countries provide when it comes to such things as conflicts where we're mitigating the harm of how ASEAN is not able to help, right? Yes, I'll take that POI.
you please address the principle that we brought on closing government of how ASEAN member nations have the principal obligation to interfere with government?
I will address that. I'm moving on to that right now. So why do we win over CG at the end of the day? They talk about how like people are going to lose, like Burmese people who have lost democracy are obviously going to have, like, ASEAN is going to have a principal obligation to protect them, right? We tell you that this exists on either side of the case. Even if there's no ASEAN way, we've already proven to you the mutual exclusivity on why other nations are supposed to help as well. We tell you that Myanmar is actually like geographically closer to nations such as Bangladesh and Bhutan, especially in those regions. We tell you at the end of the day, this still happens on the other side, and they weren't able to prove exclusivity to this. They talk about ethnic cleansing as well. We tell you there's already global response that comes to it. The ASEAN does not consist of the entire globe. We tell you at the end of the day, there's still global response that can be made. This is not exclusive on both sides. So what are the harms that we bring to you that are actually exclusive on our side? We talk about political tension, right? I think that this means that generally we're able to take the debate on how political tension is a harm that they cannot prove. What they tell you on closing government is that they said that this is not likely to happen, but they never prove the propensity as to why this is not likely to happen. We tell you that unless they're able to tell us why is this unlikely to happen, and therefore why is this not a prominent harm, they can never neglect the harm that comes from this. But secondly, we also tell you, insofar as like this comes of regions of proxy states, how Laos is essentially a proxy state of Thailand in the current status quo, right? They tell you likely as well. They don't get propensity analysis. For these reasons, they take the harm, right? But thirdly, why do we bring the benefits at the end of the day? We tell you that there's like harms in proxy states and what their benefits that they talk to in terms of like how they're able to help humanitarian aid, we prove to you as mutually exclusive on both sides and symmetric. Therefore, I'm very proud to oppose. Thank you.